2 Samuel 13 through 15. Well, it's my recommendation that the sin of David and Bathsheba and all that went with it has probably become common knowledge by now in the kingdom. And so what we have as kind of a subtitle of this period of David's life is a family in turmoil based on what David had done. And our story starts with David. He's in his mid-50s. He is living in the city of David, Jerusalem. And he's got 20 boys that we know of that, of course, are going to vie for the throne in some sense. The firstborn son is Amnon. The thirdborn son is Absalom. The secondborn, Kileab, we never hear about. And the story goes that Absalom, after hearing that his sister Tamar is raped by Amnon, waits 2 years, 2 full years, to see what his dad would do about it, and nothing happens. And so Absalom plans very carefully and kills Amnon. Who is Absalom? Well, we can tell from the story. I'd recommend everything that we hear about him from here on out will be that he's not a loyalist to Yahweh. He never makes any overtures in that direction. He certainly is a narcissistic man, very arrogant. And he's only 18 years old at this point. And so is he loved by David? It seems that David is very attached or very much in love with his son, Absalom. But he never punishes him for what happens. And so what happens at this point is Absalom flees up to Geshur to live with his grandfather for 3 years. And at this point there is no contact that we know of between David and Absalom. Absalom does not return the love that his father has at all, from what we can tell. And in fact, by the time Absalom does return back to Jerusalem, it will be then another 2 years that he'll be in Jerusalem. He seems to be, as it were, forgiven by his father for the murder of his other son. But there is no relationship that's restored between them. So again, for 2 more years, we hear that Absalom and David never get together. So that's a total of 5 years from this event. So now David is in his late 50s. Absalom's about 23. And then we hear, at this point, Absalom is starting to plot the overthrow of his father. He'll be meeting with people and saying, if it was me that was king, I would do this and that. And so he acts like a politician to turn people against his father. In fact, in a very symbolic move, he goes down to Hebron. Hebron, of course, is where David was initially installed as the king of Judah. And it is there that he announces his kingdom, or that he is the king. And that move makes David very nervous. And so when Absalom returns to Jerusalem, David apparently feels he has no other option but to flee. And so there's a rather drawn-out story there in our last chapter, chapter 15, of David fleeing his own city, the city of David, going across the Jordan River into the hills of Ephraim. And we'll read in Psalm 3 of that story of the mindset of David during this time. Well, again, very hard times here. What is David thinking as he's going through this? Several words come to mind. I think he's still committed to Yahweh. This is a man, again, that has lived through a lot of ups and downs, and one of the hallmarks of a loyalist is that even in difficult times, of course, you remain steadfast in your commitment to your God. And I think that would be how we would define David at this point still. He's grieving his family situation by all means. I mean, this is his own family that has fallen apart and that is causing all this trouble. So I'm sure that's heavily on his mind. He's also acknowledging that this is simply playing out 2 Samuel 7 again, that he will reap what he sows, and that God is not punishing him as much as allowing the natural consequences of sin to play out the string, as it were. And so that's what I would even say as we think of David at this time. He is reaping what he's sowing. He is understanding that God is still with him, for him. In fact, I'd even say that David believes he's in the center of God's will. Now, how can we say that when we have such a terrible situation? Well, that is part of, again, the story, I think, of Scripture that we will be learning as we watch men like David go through very difficult times and yet look back upon these times to say, God, you did nothing wrong. I was where, in one sense, I was supposed to be based upon how I was learning how to be loyal and even going through many missteps in that process. So David is in the center of God's will in some real odd way, even though these of course, are very, very difficult times.